Hello folks, and welcome to July. Ready for it? I just had like that, I think it's Taylor Swift, when she says in the song, "Are you ready for it?" I should know which song. My daughter's a Swiftie. I don't have a clue. Hi. Welcome to July and the 26th week of the Quilters Playcation Adventure Sewalong Rainbow Edition. I am your host, Cheryl Arkison, your guide, your instigator, your teacher, whatever you want to call me. Haven't quite figured out what the right word is, so if you got any suggestions, I will take them. But I am here for week 26 of our Adventure Sewalong. Want to show you the next great block in this series. Got to fill in that spot right there, and the request has come a few times now for using triangles and other requests for using scraps. The scraps are building up, and I was tempted to push it off again for another week just because design-wise I'm like, we did a scrap block above where this is gonna go, but that's good. Creative genius. Oh, well, that is very kind of you, Sleeping Dog Quilts, to say creative genius. I don't think I would go that far, but I'll take it for now, that's for sure. But yeah, I want to fill in this spot, and the request was to use triangles and to use scraps. So I pulled out, let me show you. I have been putting all of the small scraps for this, whoops, for this Sewalong in this box. One of my pandemic birthday presents, right? When we couldn't go out shopping. Ooh, I just did that, like those ASMR videos, weird. And I've been filling it with the scraps. So it was kind of, you know, not packed in, but almost full with all the scraps. So I dumped it out on my sewing table today and spent, not gonna lie, less than 10 minutes sorting. I pulled out backgrounds on both of my sets of blocks, and then the colors for each of the block colors for the monochromatic one, pulled them out for each one, and that's it. And then I did a next level sort, which I'm going to get into here in a second, that took me 3 minutes. So it does not take long. I timed it, 3 minutes and 15 seconds actually. It doesn't take long, right? It's so worth organizing it, because if you try to sew without doing a little bit of organizing, it's just going to be stressful and a mess. I do need to show you before we move on this fabric that my sister-in-law found in the thrift store for me. And it's making me wish I had done neons in my monochromatic version instead of the sort of shaded fabrics, because the black and white with neon would be pretty cool. But I may still use this fabric on the back. Anyway, I digress. It's July. My daughter is back from Egypt, safely, covered in bug bites, but other than that, she is good. Not too jet lagged today, which is good. And yeah, I feel better because she's back. I felt really out of sorts with her gone. I do whenever one of the kids is gone for long. We haven't had a lot of moments where this happens, but even if one of them goes for a sleepover, it's kind of weird. I told my husband on the weekend that all three of them need to leave the house at the exact same time when they move out, so that I don't have this weirdness. I can just have the heartache of them going. But anyways, so we're doing scraps today. Let me show you the block. I, of course, did the monochromatic, added a little pop of my green into it. This is what my block looks like. Yours, the next one I make, they're all going to be so different. This is definitely one of the blocks that is about the process and understanding where you're going and having real fun with the play, more than what the finished block is going to look like. So it's going to be kind of chaotic, maybe, but where there's moments where we can add order to it, a little bit wild, totally scrap beautiful in there. So let's move you over here. turn you around and get to sewing. Let's turn you around. Miss the ladies there. Hello, ladies. Gotta say hi to them. You know we do. Okay. Ms. Raspberry Kitty says she's here for the chaos. My kind of lady. There we go. Okay. This is what we have to do. So I had a big pile of my scraps. And I sorted it sort of two ways. This is half of them. This is a block that does not have any background in it. In my case, that's entirely up to you if you want to add some background to it. So I removed all the background pieces. There's one here that has a little bit on it. Most of these are trimmings, leftovers from other blocks, various processes. So I separated all of my colors into two piles. One pile were all of the ones with any kind of an angle to them, so wedge shapes, triangles, and I've included in here any of the curve pieces that I have left over. And the reason is because these curves can be very quickly turned into triangles. So I have all of those, and then I have anything that's like a strip or a rectangle or square-ish. That's a separate pile. You may or may not need this pile today. You might need little bits to fill spaces, so don't put it away entirely. I'm just kind of setting it off to the side because I may not need it. We'll have to see how things go here. Okay, and then the next thing you want to do is organize these a little bit. I pulled out just these little tiny ones. You don't have to go that far, but they were there. I had a couple that were already assembled, right? So a trimming that I cut off where it's already attached, so keeping those. I've put all of the ones that have a curve with them so that I can cut those curves into angles when it comes time to use them. And then the two other piles are these ones. So I just want to repeat, it pays off to spend a couple of minutes before you start sewing actually getting these organized, because then when you sew, it's just boom and you go to sewing. So the way these two piles are organized are by the angle on the cut. So you can see here, I'm just going to pull out one that's fairly obvious, right? I have it so that the wedge shape is right angle on the left and wedge on the right. Even if I flip that over, it's now on the left, but that angle is similar. And the reason I do this is because if we look at this pile, for example, it is not the same angle wedge shape. If I try to sew these two together, I end up with this shape. Not the end of the world. Let's be honest, this is not the end of the world, but my goal in dealing with these scraps, dealing with these angles and triangles, is to get them to a functional piece that I can sew together for my block. So by having them separated with those angles, it means that I can grab two from this pile and sew them together, and that's going to create a rectangle. I can take two from the other pile, sew them together, and that's going to create a rectangle. So that's our goal, is to kind of create a whole bunch of pairs where we sew two triangles together to get a rectangle, a square, square-ish, rectangle-ish. Don't worry about them not being perfect. They're scraps, and we will trim and press and square up as needed. So once you've taken the time to get these organized, we're going to start sewing. So I'm going to literally take one of the piles to start with. So I'll take this wedge pile, and I'm going to start making pairs and sew them together. So when you sew those wedges together at the machine, we're going to sew down that way, right? And so it's going to look funny like this, but when we open up, it will look like that. So many of us, myself included, I've done it many, many times, think, oh, we need to match those angles and the straight sides are matched. But when we do that, what we really do is create a kite shape. Again, nothing wrong with the kite shape, but our goal here with these scraps today is to create more rectangle type shapes for this block. Maybe down the line we'll do something with that kite shape. Not ruling it out, but not today. So when you go to the machine, everything's going to look like this. And I'm just going to chain piece a whole bunch of these together. Now let's talk about, sometimes we have curves. You can see this is a curve, right? It is not an angle. This was cut from a curve. I'm just going to cut that curve off. Whoops. One little bit there. And now I have a good triangle wedge shape. I can pair it with this. Now my angles aren't exactly the same, so I can swap around with other ones. Right, I could do that. Sure, why not? See, I have that little bit of background in there. Maybe I don't want that. I could rip it off, but I'm going to have a corner there. Or I can just sew it and then trim that block down a little bit. But I think what I'll do is sew this to a smaller one anyways, so that I'm not trimming off a bunch of this orange that I would need here. So you're just going to go through, you're going to make pairs and sew them together. You don't have to use every single scrap you have. It depends on how many you have. But I want to get a good handful of these blocks sewn. And I want to play around. I want to have some different angles going on. Now this is fun because I have this sort of piece here that's kind of a wedge, but kind of not. I'm going to go that way. And sew those together. Right, got another wedge there, also that. So I'm not paying attention to, you know, is it in rainbow order or anything. I'm using my scraps as they come to me. Those of you who've been around for a while, you know that's kind of my deal, is that I will use things as they arrive in front of me. Not try to force them to be something they don't want to be, always. Okay, so we're on to the next pile here. I'm just going to set that one aside because it's left over. Right, got some smaller bits. That works too. That's all good. I got some long ones here, which is kind of fun because those could create some interesting things going on. I feel like I had that wedge in the wrong pile. I did. So that one's not as long. What do we got here? Yeah, this was such a slight wedge that maybe I'll do that. There we go. Right, so just play around with what you have. See where things want to go, what they want to be. Don't worry about little skinny parts of it. I actually think the skinny bits are going to be quite interesting when all is said and done. They're going to create some interesting kind of dimensions. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and sew a few more together. Now see, had this nice long one, but don't really have any other long ones, so I'm going to make this as wide as can be, so I don't need that little bit. This is kind of a build it as we go block, so you're going to see my thought process as I put this together. So let's do, I don't have a lot of yellows, so I'm going to do a yellow Let's do another green, yellow and a green. There we go, in that wedge shape. And then I want to show you what to do with the curves. Because we've had quite a few curves throughout the process, so you might have some of those scraps hanging around. I'll just set those aside for the time being. But now I have these curves, right? Here's one that I've already trimmed down into a triangle. I'm going to show you what I do with the curves. Let's move that over. Let's take this purple one here, right? So I have this concave curve. All I'm going to do is take a ruler to give myself a straight line. I'm not measuring. And then I can sew those two together. It's pretty straightforward. Now it's kind of an improv half square triangle. And I know there might be folks who'll be like, oh, but you cut off those little bits of purple. That was a waste. Well, it was a waste if it wasn't used at all, right? This way, there is some use happening. Now you might have a block like that, right? Where you have both sides of the curve, but of course they don't match. So just to make my life easier, I'm gonna lay them on top of each other. And just like when we do a layered angle, I'm gonna cut through both. So now I know that angle is the same. So that's how we deal with the curves. Then we just sew them together, right sides together. I'll do one more here. I've got this orange, right? Now I'll go with this pink, and I specifically chose this. Whoops, my nail caught that there. I specifically chose this because it is different sizes, different angles. Sorry, I don't have room for the ruler. Let me move that up. But I can still make that straight cut. Remove this excess. And now sew those together. And then I'm going to go ahead and take this out of the machine, and we're going to press all of these. So I have my big chain of all of my bits that I've sewn together. Oh, I actually sewed together more than I thought I did. Doesn't matter. You need to sew together more than you think you're going to need, because they are going to shrink up dramatically in size. And you got to sew a bunch of these then together to get to your finished block. But that's the fun. And we're going to see where it goes, see what it wants to look like. Will we assemble it in rows and quarters? Who knows? We'll find out. So I'm not done with all my other scraps just yet. Just going to leave them there. And now we're going to go over here and we're going to press. Okay. So I'll bring you over here. Press. I mean, it's not rocket science pressing, but this way you at least got something to look at. Right, so set my seam, then press it. I'm pressing to one side. If you really want to press open, go for it. Pressing to one side can be a bit of a risk because there's bulk that you have to deal with, but I prefer that to dealing with bulk. It's easier for me to manage the bulk than it is to manage the seam allowance of open seams when I do improv work. Right? It doesn't really matter which side you press to. You could do, if there's a lighter one, just random as the case may be for me. That is what I am doing. Ooh, my pressing mat's getting hot. You'll notice I did not press these before I started. Some people really prefer when they're working with scraps to press beforehand. That's fine. Do what works. I know we have all these little sort of dangly bits here. Don't worry. We will deal with those as we start assembling the block. We're just making a whole bunch of components for our block. This one's going to be interesting. It'll be very skinny strip. But now that I've sewn it together, right, I'm not going to use probably from that point there because you won't see that, and then it'll just be bulk in the seam allowance, but it got us part of the way. Sometimes you got to sew those things together to see what's happening, right? And skinny bits are always quite delicious in with the block. Okay, so we have all our components. Let's go back to the cutting mat and do some layout play. Now, if you've ever taken a class with me and we've done slabs, you know that I'll be all about build up a whole bunch of components before we start thinking about layout. That's not what I'm doing today. I want to think about layout sort of right from the get-go. That's not big enough, so I'm going to go there. And I'm going to start kind of laying out and making shapes, right? I can use different angles to play around and make some interesting shapes. I'm trying to have roughly similar heights. I cut that off because it has that bit of background there. So roughly similar heights. They're not all going to be the same, right? I can play around with what goes where. If I have ones that are radically different in height, maybe that becomes, you know, a different section of the quilt here, right? Maybe I want to do something like that, or we start playing around. I don't have to have it all sorted out. But I want to see where we're going, right? Kind of like the idea of it being horizontal there, so we can play around, right? So you can see I'm trying to place fabrics next to each other to continue the line. It's not always going to work, let's be honest, but gives me a good start. So I have kind of a good start. I may need more pairs. I'm just going to start with this in terms of assembly. So as I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, oh, I'm a little bit short right there. So this is where I want to go either into more triangles, or I can go into my patches of, or my squares and rectangles. And do I have something there that I could add, right? So I could add a pink right there to extend that line. Once I sew this together, it might be the same height as this. I'll probably need something here. Will I be wide enough? I don't know, but I'm just going to start building with this and see where it takes me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go for the smallest components to add to the biggest. So I need to sew these two together in order to sew it to this. And I'll need to sew this together in order to sew this section to that, and I'll need these sewn together before I can sew this to that. So I'm just going to grab pairs and sew, trying to be sort of efficient, but I won't grab everything all at once so that I don't get confused about where was that supposed to go, that sort of thing. I'm just grabbing a few of these to get me the idea, and we'll go from there. Now, see these, right? A lot going together. I want to join them together on the pink. So I'm going to place these right sides together to sew. I'm going to go ahead and before I sew, get rid of that. You can do that either with a ruler and a rotary cutter or just with scissors. For smaller bits, I tend to go just with scissors. And then I'm I'm just gonna press all these, regroup, and do another round, right? Again, because I don't want to get confused or lost on where pieces were supposed to go. So give me a second to press. Now that we're joining these components, when you think about pressing direction, you're going to want to go with wherever you can reduce bulk as much as possible. So for example, I have this piece that I sewed on. I'm going to press towards this one because there's no seam allowance. There's seam allowance here. So there'll be less bulk if I go that way. That's what I mean by reducing bulk. All right. Just to get us going, you can press open as well, of course, like I said before. And things will really shrink up as we go, but that's all right. So bear with me. I feel like I wish I had time lapse at this point, but it is also one of those things where it's just easier if you can kind of see what I did as I did it, watch it build. Right, so I'm going to sew those two together. It's pretty straight, so I'm going to go with that. And then while I'm thinking of it, I'm going to sew these two as well. Remove my little dog ears. So there's a great tip that's come up in the comments, and I'm going to absolutely reiterate it. Louise said that she uses her cell phone camera to remind her of where everything goes. Bang on, Louise. Take pictures as you go so that you have that memory. You don't need to keep the pictures forever, right? They don't have to hog up space in your camera. You can delete them as soon as you're done. But yeah, absolutely a fundamental thing. Of course, I'm talking to you on my phone camera, so I can't do that. Just a minor detail, right? Minor detail. Okay, let's see where we're at. So we have these different components, you know, coming together. I'm liking where this is going. You can always go into that rectangular pile and grab things. So we want to sew this to these two together. This is one of those times where, yep, I'm going to take my ruler and give myself a nice straight cut there. Just bear with me because I have to kind of rotate it to do that. Try to keep your garbage put away as you go. Just process-wise makes things a lot smoother, and you don't get all these little bits going everywhere. And it literally takes seconds. So it's worth doing. Okay, and then we'll see if this lines up with the other one, or if I need to add something to it. Right, so it's a very iterative process as we go. So look at that, I'm pretty close to the same width. I'm going to go with that. Again, I'm going to lay these, you could lay them right sides up and give yourself a fresh cut. I'm going to lay mine, you know what, I am going to lay it right sides up. I actually find it's easier to see everything. But it's kind of a, in this case, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. You'll just remove the extra bits, make sure you didn't miss anything. Now I have a nice fresh cut. And I can go ahead and sew that together. And we've got probably about half the block done. To see what else we need. And then we'll go from there. So let me give this a press. There may come a point, because we have so many seams in here, that pressing open is the better option. I know on my first block this morning, the final sort of assembly seam, that's exactly what I did, just to help my block stay a little flatter. But maker's choice. Maker's choice. So I'm going to give that a good press. My final blocks are 10.5 inches in this colorway, so obviously I'm a lot smaller than that. You know, I'm at 7 and a bit. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and a bit. Yeah, so I've got a few more inches to add around. But remember, I have these other components. I like the idea of maybe a yellow there. I could take some of these, you know, and add, let's go maybe that way. Or do I want to, I don't know, maybe I will stick with it up there. And I can add, because those are pretty similar widths, so you can't see that. Those are pretty similar widths, so I can add them there. And then I can just fill this gap in. I could fill it in with another triangle that I make, or I can go into my scraps. I can take this bit that's from a previous block, which is actually exactly what I'm going to do. Right? So I can sew now this to this, these two together, those together, and sew it to that, and then make a strip of something for the bottom in there. Hopefully that will give me the width. We'll quickly do it and find out. Right? That's all we can do. Add if we have to, cut off if we need to. It all works. Doesn't take long, but as I said, it's pretty iterative as we go. But this is that kind of improv work that's just really energetic, a little bit different. It's about, definitely about the process more than the finished block. We could all start with the exact same group of scraps, which is kind of not really something that's ever going to happen, but we could start with the same group of scraps and all come up with completely different results, which is the really exciting part. That's one of the things I truly, truly love, is that we can't all be making exactly the same thing. It's way more interesting, way more interesting if we can do, you know, some variation and each put our own individual spin on things. So there we have that, right? So I want to sew these 3 pieces together. There's some just, oh, it's just so dynamic. I'm really, really loving it. So again, I'm going to put these together by cutting a nice, straight, clean edge on here, sew down there, and then I'll press it and add it to that piece, and we'll see where we are with width. Try to pay attention to your seam allowances. Is this all making sense? Like, does it help to see me go through this process? Because you're seeing a glimpse into my thought process as well as the actual process of making the block. And you may have made different decisions along the way, and that's totally fine. All right, so now we're going to join these 2 pieces together. Again, I'm going to layer them. They're almost like exactly the same height. That's crazy. That is totally random that worked out. But you will see I am trimming off, you know, a good chunk from that block, but that's okay. That's okay. Little bit of trimmings that go into the garbage is better than all of this fabric not being used. Because if fabric isn't being used, it might as well be in the garbage. if you've taken it out of functional service. Right? It's kind of like you can have the good china in the cupboard, but if all it ever does is sit in the cupboard, what use is it of to you, right? Sure, maybe it was your grandma's or it was a wedding present or something like that. But if you're not using it, it has no real value. Okay. So I'm giving this a good press. I'm going to hit it with a little bit of flatter, right? Our good old flatter pressing spray. I forgot to ask my daughter. I bought her for her trip, right? Because you're going to a super hot country like Egypt, and apparently the humidity was really bad this year. And they were in a heat wave, so there were rolling blackouts, so they would lose their air conditioning at times. So you don't want to take, you know, a million things clothes, but so I bought her Soak, this company that makes flatter, makes little packages, like one-time use packages of their Soak wash. And so I bought her a handful of those so that she could do some laundry room or bathroom sink kind of laundry if necessary. Okay, I want to see where I'm at width-wise, right? Because I want to have these blocks be 10.5 inches. I'm trying to see at its maximum, where am I? I'm 10.25, 10, between 10 and 10.25. So close, so close. So this is where I could do something like this. I could add yet another strip, right? That's going to shrink it up. Here you can kind of see that way. Add another triangle here. It's going to shrink it up when you sew it in. So you don't want to add too small of a strip. I've got wiggle room to trim off here because I'm not going to lose a lot of points and everything, right? So I can do that sort of thing, kind of like that idea, because then that orange extends there, and then I can make another triangle and add it down here, or do something like take from a piece that I already have, right? So if I do something like that, that's going to get me my width. Then I can go back into my triangle scraps, repeat essentially the process so that I can create another bit for the bottom, because I'm obviously not tall enough in this. Alternatively, I can add here and then add a whole strip. I could go into my rectangles and strips, right, and add one entire strip if I want for my other scraps. My goal for myself is to use most of these triangle strips, because I have a couple of ideas for these other rectangle bits too, but go ahead and use them if they're there and you just need, you're like, oh, that is just easier to finish off the block that way, then go that way. I'm not going to do this all on the live. I think you've seen enough of the process to feel comfortable. There were a couple of good comments there saying that this was indeed very helpful, so I'm glad for that. So I'm not going to go through and show you all of this. I will finish it offline and share the picture though, of course, because you got to see where things are at. And then I'll be curious to see what this block looks like in with the midst of the other blocks, because we really haven't had a lot of blocks with small pieces. There's been a few. It was definitely time for more. So I think it'll be a fun addition to our quilt. So just let me scroll and make sure there weren't more questions or comments that I missed. Ms. Raspberry Kitty really likes the block. Thank you. I'm glad. I want to say your name's Karen. I'm really bad with names here on that, but just checking. Don't see anything else here. So I'm going to go ahead and raise us up. Say goodbye to the ladies. Ms. M. We'll go with Ms. M. I can do that. And then there I am again. So just holding the block up to get a bit of a better idea. Just because I'm like neat kind of points going on with all this. It's not finished. but we'll put it in here just to give us an idea of where things stand, right? Looks kind of cool with the block above it, especially with that sort of scrappiness. So good stuff happening. We just continue on playing and having a great time with these blocks, having a great time with each other. I'm so glad you're all here today. We will be back. I may not be here next week. I'll let you know. I'll post something if I'm not. My daughter's off of training for 2 weeks, so we might take advantage of that. But I'll let you know. But you know that I'll catch up, and we have 49 blocks for the year. So if we miss a week or two, we're all good. I'll miss you though. I'll just be honest about that. So I am Cheryl Arkeson. Remember that if you're posting any of these things, you want to use the hashtags Quilters Playcation, QP Adventure Sewalong, QP Adventure Sewalong 2024, so that everybody else can see what you're doing here on Instagram. Otherwise, you can catch us on YouTube, and we'll see you next time for week 27, because this was week 26 of the Quilters Playcation Adventure Sewalong Rainbow Edition. Again, I am your host, your creative genius, Cheryl Arkeson. I'm glad you were here with me today. We'll see you next time, folks. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.